Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Jim Bureau, who is the president and CEO over at Loftware. And we're going to dive into some topics around identification. We're going to talk a little bit about what Loftware is up to, but we're also going to talk about breaking down silos within your organization, within the supply chain, not only internally, but also externally as well, and a little bit too about the mix of humans, the human worker, along with the kind of automated worker or automation, and the importance of collaboration within our supply chain overall. So, really interested in digging into this topic and this conversation with Jim here. So, Jim, welcome to the show. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me, Lawton. Much appreciated.
Yeah, happy to get you on here, and happy to talk to you. And we've had Loftware on a couple times on the show, but we haven't had Jim on, so it's good to get you on here as well, and learn from you a little bit too. So for people that are not familiar with Loftware, why don't you kind of kick it off here and give us a brief overview of what Loftware is and what you all do?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, ironically enough, people may not have heard of us. We are actually celebrating our 40th anniversary
40.
this
Wow,
upcoming year.
congratulations.
Yeah, when I look it back, I'm like, gosh, like where did we start from and where are we at now? It just seems like eons away from each other. But we have
Yeah,
evolved quite a bit over the 40 years. Um, so yeah, we're excited about it. Your
yeah,
question is like, so what do we do and how do people like
yes, yeah.
know Loftware? Um, we always like to say is Loftware is how product identification gets right across the supply chain. So we have
Mm,
this notion of what we refer to as connected packaging, so connected packaging and labeling. And in essence, it ensures you have authentic, compliant, and traceable products across your trading partners and internal operations. And
mm,
the net result of that is you end up saving, our customers end up saving millions of dollars. Consumers end up getting product packaging and use of all of that at the right time and right place. And we do that in a sort of a cloud-based setting, which essentially means it's all right there. Everything that you need
mhm.
to do in order to facilitate that is all right there. And we've been doing it for 40 years or so,
Yeah.
and we have our the the base that we serve tends to be um, things that are consumer oriented, right? So think anything that goes on your skin, in your body,
Mm,
um, uh, uh, manufacturing. So any kind of process manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, we are heavily involved in, and certainly life sciences as well. Those are sort of three core themes that we have. And we've got tens of thousands of customers across the globe that we do
mm.
that with.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting, and obviously a huge important part of the supply chain, that identification overall, and doing it for 40 years. So you must be doing something right, I will say. So you're good
We've
product, good
evolved.
solution there. Yeah, definitely. I mean, maybe tell us a little bit about that. I mean, over the 40 years, because you said you're asking the team, like, how did we get here and how did we evolve? Like, what have you seen has been, because obviously the supply chain in general in 40
Oh
years
gosh.
has changed a lot, especially like in the last 10 years really, or,
Yes.
or even sooner. Like, I mean, tell us like what stands out as kind of over
So
those 40 years, some of the
yeah.
evolution.
So it's funny when you go sort of way back, right? Where we originated ourselves is getting a label on a box in a consistent
Mm,
manner at scale, right? That goes sort of way back. Um, and it stayed relatively stable for the first 15 years or so. So there's some evolutions or so. Um, with the onset of COVID, though, in particular, so
mm,
go back to late 2019, 2020, and since that time, I mean, you've seen a lot of evolution in the supply chain business, and I think part of that is the result of you know, um, people needing to be resilient in
Mm,
how they are navigating their supply chains, right? So, at some point in time, strategic partnerships became really important, and they still are. However, people have needed to have um, multiple alternatives of how they acquire goods and services to be able to operate their supply chain. It was quite interesting during COVID, in particular. At the time I was working in supply chain, and we saw this huge shift from um, overseas shipping of goods
mm,
to more local sourcing for
yeah.
most everything, because that's the only way they could get goods there. But to be able to make that shift in a hurry was quite substantial, and not all the systems and so forth were in place at that time to do it. In the even in the last 9 months, right, we've seen similar instances with tariffs. How do people
Hmm.
navigate tariffs? And um, you know, some countries have different tariffs regulations than other countries, so companies are pretty resilient when it comes to figuring out how to optimize what it is that they do, and they'll find a way to make it cost effective for them, even if that means rerouting their supply chain to make it work.
Mm,
However, there's a lot of uncertainty in that. And one of the things that I have found over my career is most people and organizations, they can manage what they know. It's what they
mm,
don't know is what they have a hard time managing. In the sort of business that we've been in, we've worked with automobile manufacturers that are expecting um, shocks for a production line in Arlington, Virginia, and instead they're in Arlington, Texas. So that has huge ramifications on
mm,
the production line. We've had instances where med device companies need to do recalls for components within their product. Well, they can't identify explicitly which component, where it came from, and what's at risk. What do they have to do? They have to recall everything.
mm,
And so, we've seen ourselves evolve quite a bit over the years, and we've been working very diligently to ensure that, we have a strong belief that the way to achieve all of that is getting some standardization and
mm,
collaboration with the trading partners that exist, whether those are sort of upstream suppliers that are sending you goods to internal operations. I mean, a lot of these organizations that we work with, assembling a product is a global feat, right? And so
mm,
they'll take one piece in from one location, assemble it, send it internally to another location. They add the other components, and then ultimately it ends up going out the door to a customer. But all of that's
yeah.
got to be sort of interconnected, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty incredible to think about. Everything that goes into the products we utilize, whether we utilize them rarely or on a daily basis. Everything that goes into that, and the global potential touches that happen right along the way to make that happen. And I think the average person probably doesn't think much about that,
No.
right? But obviously, us in the industry, we think about it, right? And it's like it's fascinating to think about that. So you mentioned about the collaboration there, and I think a lot of times, in business in general, and I think especially in supply chain, we hear the term silos a lot, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes I think we refer to those silos as kind of the internally, right? This department is doing this, and this department doesn't know they're doing that, but at some point, like they're impacting each other, and they just don't quite know what's going on, right? And they're probably missing some efficiencies or some opportunities to kind of collaborate together in that way. But there's also these silos that occur kind of externally too, right?
Yeah.
Which I think, you're talking about these kind of global partners and things that need to come together to make the product happen. So tell us a little bit about, how does some of this technology and some of these things, I mean, and this standardization that you mentioned, I mean, how does that help to break down some of these silos, whether they're internal or external?
Yeah, yes. So I will tell you, so I just for a little context. So I've been working in the supply chain space for probably the
Mm-hmm.
last 10 years or so. Um, and then sort of evolved into, Loftware over the course of the last, 4 years after. And sometimes it's really helpful to have a little bit of a different sort of outside in perspective on some of these things. And so I really had a bit of an aha moment, shortly after I arrived here and working with our product teams, et cetera. We started going into the detail. But one of the things I love to do, um, this is maybe a little bit of the geeky nerd in me, but it's
Nerd out. Let's hear
right.
it.
It's always great to like physically go to your customers and watch the operations. It's one thing to sort of
Oh yeah.
philosophically sit at a whiteboard and sort of go through things. It's another thing to sit inside of a clean room at a chip factory
Mm.
and see how they're actually processing things. Um, One of the things that caught my eye early on is in the vast majority of cases, the very first thing that people do when they are receiving goods is they relabel them. And the
Mm.
reason why they relabel them is more often than not, they need to route those goods throughout their own organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so their systems are anticipating a certain sort of data format, labeling format, et cetera. And, you could probably appreciate this. What the representation of what's on a package or a label are sort of the keys to unlocking how that good gets routed to
Yeah.
a finished product to the end. And I remember we were sitting with a customer and I was watching sort of this relabeling process going on and posed the question to them, when you guys get goods in, are you not collaborating with your suppliers on what those should look like? I'm like, yeah, we do, but workflow is always an issue, and there's a lot of changes that go on. And and I posed the question, well, when you send your goods out to your customers who are a little bit more towards the end consumer, what happens? And and they said, well, tell you what oftentimes happens, or most of the time, is our customers will give us a format from which they want us to ship them things. And I said, well, how does that actually work? Like, walk me through the details. And they're like,
Mm.
well, they use a system similar to, they either use Loftware or someone like Loftware. They go create a format that they want us to use, and then they email it to us.
Mm.
And when they email it to us, they literally take a picture of it with their cell phone, send
Yeah.
us a spec sheet on it, and then we go into maybe in some cases the exact same system that they designed it on, but our own internal use of it and recreate what they just did. And like,
Mm.
well, how long of a process does that take? And I'm like, well, sometimes it's 3 to 4 months to go through that iterative process. And and it's a back and forth. Well, so if you think about the changes that occur with goods, um, if I am a manufacturer, let's say I'm an automobile
Mm-hmm.
manufacturer, and I've got 6,000 suppliers.
Sure.
If I want those 5 to 6,000 suppliers to take the format that I need to process things on my end, I literally need to send an email out to 5,000 individuals.
Yeah.
5,000 individuals have to go in,
Mm-hmm.
write software code, or go into their configuration of their labeling and packaging systems to meet my specifications and standards, and hope that
Mm-hmm.
once I do that, it doesn't ever change again, which we all know is not true.
Yeah.
Um, and so something has to happen, right? And so the inordinate amount of time and effort that takes to achieve that is it's a huge cost and burden
Mm,
on the supply chain. And the other thing that happens is you end up having all of these goods that are sort of in process or in flight when you might need to know exactly when and what's being used throughout the channel. So I remember we were sitting at the table with the customer and we were like, hey, look, Loftware's been in business for 40 years. We got customers all over the place. Um, if we gave you the ability to collaborate with your
mm,
supply chain, right? And it's really they're nodes. I don't like the notion of suppliers and customers because oftentimes, if you actually look at the supply chain, we've got, you know, customers who have suppliers and those suppliers have customers and they're all
mhm,
sort of interconnected. But anyway, if we gave them the ability to say, look, we're going to do this once, publish our specifications out there,
mhm,
and allow you role-based access to access those specifications, pull them in so that you don't have to recode anything. Um,
mhm.
if I, as the vendor, need a change, I should be able to go change that in a central location and have it ripple across my entire supply chain without my suppliers having to do anything. And
Yeah.
and likewise, the other important piece of that is let's say you're a large auto manufacturer and you're relying upon, some of the suppliers in the auto space. They're quite big themselves, right?
Mhm,
So, if you got someone making, transmissions, they're likely not making a transmission for one car company. They're making them for multiples. But the production line, right? The production lines has to have the ability to say, okay, this unit goes to this customer, this unit goes to this customer without stopping that production line. And
mm,
so, when we think about collaboration, that's sort of where we would like to go with this is giving people the ability to write once, reuse all over the place, and be able to control um, what goes on those goods through the entire supply chain. That that's
mm.
and that's a you asked the original question, like, gosh, think
Yeah.
about where you started 40 years ago and where we are today. I mean, the technology and the evolution has allowed that to sort of transform itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's really interesting. And it's like, I mean, such a great example where you said, you got 5,000 suppliers, right? Now you got to do this 5,000 times, right? To, like any kind of update. So I think that makes so much sense to kind of make that so connected, right? And make it easier for everybody. And it's, recalling situations like that in my career where, we had to we were the supplier essentially of shipping out product to these customers, and then they were some of these big retailers that have a lot of power, right? And
You
we
got
had to
to
make
do it.
changes to our labels and things like that. I mean, I remember one situation we had one person. Their job was to use a sharpie and draw a line through a certain barcode because the customer
Don't
was
use that
such
one.
a yeah, yeah. The customer was such a big deal that barcode on our label was just throwing off whatever they were doing, right? And they were like, we're gonna keep finding you basically if you don't change this. And the
Yeah,
solution was
yeah.
draw a
That
line
that
through.
that sounds like such a
Yeah,
mundane thing, but
yeah.
those small little things, I mean, they literally can end up costing
Oh
hundreds
yeah,
of millions of dollars in disruption to a supply
yeah.
chain. And if you think about it, even now, right? So, you get boxes that come in. I mean, they've got five, six labels on them, and
Hmm.
there's errors all the time. Uh,
Yeah.
it's 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 quite the complex disruptor. But they're the key, the label's the keys. The label, so you talk about automation and collaboration. The label
Sure.
and how you identify that product be, becomes the key that unlocks the ability to do all your automation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you refer to it as the key. I was just going to say that, like, and kind of the unlock to the rest of the supply chain in a sense, and it really is, because it gives you all that information in so many different ways, and allows it to continue through that. So when we talk about, like, bringing down these silos, making it more connected through this, and being able to open that up, right, and not have to do a little tweak 5,000 times, right, to
Yeah.
to this thing. I mean, when we think about that, right, there's still very much like a human kind of element to that, right? But a lot of what we're talking about lately in supply chain is automation. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about kind of how do you see kind of the mix of automation with the human element inside the supply chain and the warehouse, and how is that kind of coming together collaboratively, or what is
Yes.
the way to do it?
So that's a great question. Because the whole dynamics are changing. I mean, if you go
Hmm.
into some highly automated warehouses, I mean, you can have a few hundred square foot, few hundred thousand square foot
Yeah.
distribution center with very few people actually working in there,
Hmm.
right? And so, and people worry about jobs and the roles. And what I see evolving, at least in our space, and there's really it's a bit of a shortage, I would characterize it as, in the type of worker, this type of skilled worker that's needed. It's an opportunity, right? But
Hmm.
what we see are, um, you know, well, let me break it down a little bit, because in our space, it's still evolving. I mean, I can't believe I'm actually sitting here in almost 2026 now, and uh, talking about the need to evolve to cloud, right? But we
Hmm.
are in our
Yeah.
space, and part of the reason that that happens is, in manufacturing, or any kind of large supply chain. I mean, people have locations all over the globe, and some of those are in areas that have high bandwidth, high throughput, and some of them are in areas that don't quite have that. So people worry about, okay, if I got a production line producing some kind of pharmaceutical product, I can't stop that production line, and so they
Mm.
worry about being on the cloud to do that. Well, there's ways to solve that problem, right? I think Netflix, right? I could watch a movie,
Hmm.
offline. Well, you had to be able to do it the same way. So it's evolving from on-prem software, and
Sure.
the challenge with on-prem software has always been, you only have access to the data that's sitting on your computer. And so pulling that into the cloud, which is happening at a pretty rapid pace right now. Reason why I bring all this up is, once I have all that data in the cloud, and I have not only if I'm my own entity, I have my own data, but then I have access to my trading partners' data. Then you have the ability to start applying logic to that data, right? So
Mm.
whether it's using artificial intelligence, generative AI, to manage compliance across the supply chain. And so once you're able to do that, the dynamics of the skill set of what you have people working on change, right? So rather
Mm.
than having an individual, in your example that you gave, and this happens, right? Literally taking
Yeah.
a Sharpie and marking it off, they're managing by exception, but they're using the computer systems to do that, managing by exception, so that you can put people on bigger problems that solve bigger problems. Now, the onus on us as an industry is to make sure we train those individuals so that they can, in fact, do that and embrace it.
Mm.
And I think you're slowly seeing that, but when I look across the spectrum from the companies that we work with, I mean, there's a tremendous opportunity. I know people always think that gosh, this is going to impact jobs. It will evolve jobs, right? I mean, nobody would argue that
Sure.
today the computer is a bad thing.
Hmm.
But people change and they evolve and adapt to the ways. And I think that we're going to see that. I know we're already seeing that. And so it'll be the human augmentation of the computer of the robots, so to speak, because as good as the robots are, like look, somebody's got to program them, somebody's got to monitor them, somebody's got to maintain them, and they can only go so far.
I think it's really interesting to hear that perspective, and I think that's like the same perspective I would say I share a little bit. Is that it's definitely gonna evolve and change the way that people work or interact with the systems and the data and just the physical work as well.
So, interestingly enough, I mean, one of the things that we're working on is, if you take an individual, you get a great example of your marketer example, right? 'Cause-
Sure.
and it resonates with me because like I see that kind of stuff all the time.
Hmm.
Um, but you take someone like that, right, who's doing that particular job, um, and you put them in front of a computer, and sometimes that can be overwhelming for people. What we
Mm.
are trying to
Yeah.
do though is use technology in and of itself to make the interaction with the people easier, right?
Mm.
So you think nowadays with, generative AI, being able to sort of script things for people so that it's easier for them to understand, easier for them to engage, easier for them to do. You can put computer systems in front of people that are sort of guided process flows that allow the interaction to be much easier, right? So,
Mm.
nobody nobody would nobody had to sit down with anybody and say, here's how you use Instagram, right? Here's how you use Snapchat,
Yeah.
right? Like people figure
Yeah.
it out, but it's pretty intuitive.
Hmm.
And so you got to design and make your systems similarly like consumer ready because that's what people know and that's how people engage.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's an amazing point there because it is, if you were to walk into some of these operations and just try and jump on and start, picking orders or packing or whatever the case may be, like it would be very hard to figure out. Like you have to know these functions and things like that. It's not like you said, like Instagram. It's like okay, Instagram came out, but there's not like a it's not a user manual, right,
No,
for
no, no.
Instagram or like a
Well,
an SOP or something, right?
as you might imagine, I fly a lot, right? And I'm always like
Sure.
amazed when I go to the airport. I'm looking at talking with the gate agent, and I'm like, "What are you like? What are you putting in what are you typing in there? Because
Yeah.
you're like function this, like those types of systems.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a little bit dated now, right? And you got to be able to put things in front of of an employee that they can can easily adapt to and engage in and manage
Mm.
and manage a much bigger, broader set of things.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So now when we talk about kind of the identification world, right, which is the world you live in, right? I mean, when we look towards kind of the future of this, and maybe like the future of a label, just in general. I mean, what do you see like evolving for the next couple years, and where are we moving towards from a identification technology perspective?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I'm really actually quite excited about is this whole notion of the uh, GS1 digital link, right?
Mm.
You're probably
Okay.
familiar with that. For those who aren't, um, think of something simple, a Coke can, right? So
Mm.
if you take any Coke product, it's got a QR code on that product.
Sure.
Um, Proud to say Loftware is the one that actually produces that QR code. But nonetheless,
Mm.
what that QR code represents is, again, they think of it as the keys to unlock um, a plethora of data that's behind the scenes
Mm.
that can be role-based access that gives any node in that supply chain, whether it's, the early on, end tier supplier, going all the way up through to the end consumer. can take
Mm,
the same QR code and get different things dependent upon their role. And the reason that you're able to do that is because those QR codes, ultimately end up representing a URL, right? And the URL points you to where all the data actually is. And so when we start adopting standards like the GS1 digital link, having the ability to have one way to identify a component or an end product of a good
mm,
gets streamlined across the board. And that can, you can tailor the experience for whichever node on the supply chain is touching that.
mm.
You're starting to see that play out probably a little bit more in the consumer goods and retail space right now than anything. I mean, there is a initiative underway by 2027 to change all consumer goods to a digital link QR code, which would
Mm.
be fantastic. Um, there's still a long way to go, right? We got this deadline in
Yeah.
2027, but I think there's still the vast majority of retailers still need to get there. But
Mm.
the opportunities it presents in life sciences, pharma, manufacturing, it's quite interesting, and so we're super excited about that and what we believe the GS1 Digital Link will actually bring to the table.
Mm. Yeah, very interesting. And I think, getting any further insight or visibility and just that overall kind of additional data and things, I think just makes it better, right? And kind of goes back to what we're talking about, bringing down those silos and making just the supply chain more resilient in general, I think is really interesting. So fascinating to hear about that and definitely really great to talk to you here today, Jim, and learn from you and hear some of your perspectives on kind of what's happening out there and also from the identification side of the supply chain too, which, as you said, is the key to unlock the rest of the supply chain or the next step in the supply chain, which I think is a fantastic way to put it. So really appreciate you coming on the show. If people are
Absolutely.
interested in learning more about Loftware, what's the best way to do that?
Uh, Loftware.com. All roads really to loftware.com, right? And certainly listen to the podcast such as yours is I mean, look, super enlightening. Love it when people are digging in and really trying to uncover the hidden gems out there. So much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely put the website in the show notes here as well as at thenewwarehouse.com so people can easily find it. So, Jim, thank you once again for your time on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Much appreciated.
Hey guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's video here on our YouTube channel, The New Warehouse Podcast, and I appreciate you tuning in. If you liked what you saw, make sure you subscribe to our channel, and if you like this video in particular, make sure you like it as well. And if you want to get this great t-shirt that you see in the video behind me, Warehouses Are Sexy, head to warehousesaresexy.com and get your own.